Hello, I'm Ian Paget. I'm a graphic designer who focuses on logo design, and this is my love letter to Star Wars.
Your brand plus an emotional connection with your audience equals success. This podcast explores that middle part. I'm Sam, a brand designer and your host. In each episode, I invite a guest to pick their favourite brand and unpack why it means so much. As they share, we learn what makes audiences tick, not with strategy or theory, but through that undeniable proof of successful branding, emotion.
It's actually quite hard to remember like the specific moment, but I do remember when I was quite young, and this was pre all the this was when only the original trilogy existed, and my brother had an old video, and I remember being finding the cover appealing, the sort of science fiction look to it, and the robots and so on the front. But it wasn't until the remastered special edition versions that came out of the cinema that I actually um properly watched it and got exposed to Star Wars as a brand. I do know that we are focusing really on brands, and Star Wars is a film, but it's much more than a film. It is a brand. It is something with all of the elements that build a brand. So yes, my first experience really truly was when it all came back to the cinema for a period of time, and each week attended and then kind of sucked in from there on.
So what sort of age were you at this point?
So that would have been when I was around 10. Um, and like I said, that video that my brother had, that was probably the original seed, and that must have been like 7, but I didn't know what it was and never raised any questions or never really watched it previously until it came at the cinema. So I got to experience it all in a very similar way to anyone that was born slightly earlier than me.
So we're talking here episodes 4, 5, and 6, are we? This is kind of
Yes,
original
correct. Yeah,
original trilogy.
the original trilogy. So yeah, I got to enjoy the ride of the prequels coming out, and everything since then, because obviously it's a much more substantial franchise and brand compared to what it was back then. It's really changed a lot in that time. But my love for it has remained, and probably will continue ongoing.
And what kind of kept you interested as you came to the cinema to watch the remastered original trilogy, and then as the prequel
Yeah,
trilogy came
sure,
out?
sure.
What
So
was it that kept you interested?
yeah, so I think something that's interesting because as I mentioned, we're talking about Star Wars as a brand here, not just as a film. Um, because obviously most films you go and watch, you enjoy, and you move away from it. And it's a film, that it's a story, and uh done and dusted. But something that's quite special with um Star Wars, and I don't believe that there is many things quite the same as this. There's a lot of things that are an extension of it. So uh, toys, the story behind it. So all the special effects, industrial light magic, everything that George Lucas was doing. The community around it, books, comics, um, there is this wealth of things that are all connected to these stories. Um, and I think also, at the heart of Star Wars, and I think it's something that a lot of um, people that grow up with it, the idea of the Force, and this ability to be something greater than yourself. I remember, being quite young, trying to uh, move things with my hands and stuff like this. There's a lot of uh stuff connected to it, and there's as I said, that we had the original trilogy, and then we had the prequels, and then the sequels, and then all of, like, now since Disney's taken over, there's these ongoing um sort of TV shows on Disney Plus. So in terms of content, there's a lot of stuff, but I think what really uh uh, kept my continual interest is the the creativity side of it, and the story behind it. So things like Industrial Light and Magic, and the special effects, and um here in the UK we have things like Comic Con. Well, I mean, they're globally. Things like Comic Con, where you can attend the events and actually meet the individuals that are connected to this thing. So it really has become, more so now than ever, something where if you wanted to, you could dedicate your entire life, every hour of every day, to something new that's connected to um Star Wars. So I feel it's a really wonderful thing, actually, and in a way, with the exception of maybe Marvel, uh, there really isn't anything quite like that. And from an identity point of view, it has a very distinct look, and there's a lot of particular sort of aesthetics to certain things, where just by seeing it, that it is connected to uh Star Wars. And it's one of the reasons why, when you ask me, is there a brand that I have this ongoing connection to, that I thought of Star Wars, because although it is a film, there's so much to it that uh, branding experts can really pull from.
Mm. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the visual identity. I mean, your
Sure.
specialism is logo design. So maybe
Yes.
you can talk to me about firstly, what's so successful about the Star Wars logo itself, and then maybe more broadly the visual identity.
So like, if we're going to focus on the logo itself, it is essentially a word mark. There is no uh like symbols or elements, so it is stylized typography, but it has a symmetry to it. So you have the sort of left side sliding in, and then it comes out in the same way to the right hand side. And it's immediately recognizable. It's very versatile. And it works effectively as a logo, and ticks all of the boxes. In terms of a brand, uh so I want to talk about branding, aside from just visual identity, because I think there's something that's worth bringing up. So I read a book by a guy called Patrick Hanlon, called Primal Branding, and it's it's a framework that he came up with, and something that he noticed that's consistent across all successful brands, that they have these seven elements that build up a primal brand. And you can look at any company, any successful company, and they tick all of the boxes. And Star Wars has all of these elements really nailed down. And I'll talk through what those seven things are. So there's basically the creation story. So every good brand has a creation story, and in this particular context, there is the George Lucas story, the Industrial Light and Magic story. Like there's a lot of stuff there that's very significant to film. So it has a really substantial story that you can follow along and connect with. And Apple has this with Steve Jobs, and if you think about any successful brand, they have this origin story, this creation story. Next one is creed. So basically, any belief that you have, and within the Star Wars world, you basically have the Force and the light and dark. There's a lot of very substantial belief systems within Star Wars, and again, that runs through successful brands. Um, Icons, so the visual elements, and in the case of Star Wars, and this is one part which really specifically answers your question. I think something that's very distinct with Star Wars in particular in terms of an identity is that everything every everything in it feels used and like it's been around for a while. So I mean, in terms of spaceships and stuff like that, there's a very specific, very distinct look and feel. And prior to that, any sort of science fiction, um, so if you think of like early Flash Gordon stuff, any spaceships were very clean and slick and very futuristic and brand new. And I think that's a very specific aesthetic that Star Wars introduced, and that's something that runs through uh, the original trilogy in particular. Obviously, when we got the prequels, there's a more sort of glossy slicker look to a lot of things, but in general the Star Wars aesthetic that people are really used to is the sort of the sort of grays and sort of slightly dirty looking ships with lots of tiny details on it. That's a very specific, very distinct thing. And then obviously in terms of icons, say logos, we already briefly mentioned that, but there's a lot of very distinct identifiable things like a lightsaber that's very specific to Star Wars. So these instantly recognizable things that immediately make you think of Star Wars essentially. So other things are like rituals. So uh with Star Wars, one of those rituals is obviously sitting down and watching the film. And in terms of this with other brands, it can be like the way that you open up the bottle or the can or something like that, like specific things that you do that only that specific brand do. Um, Another one is lexicon or sacred words, as which makes more sense. Uh, it's words that are specific to that brand. So with Star Wars, a lot of those words are in culture now. So using the Force, that was something that didn't mean anything prior to 1977. So there's a lot of words like that, like lightsaber. They're very specific words that are coined specifically in relation to that particular brand slash franchise. And with Apple as an example, they use things like iPhone. They add that I to the start of it. Next one is non-believers. So having something that's contrasting. So I think this really pushes the idea that when you build a brand, that it should be for a very specific group of people. And by being specific to a group of people, that there should be the people that don't believe in it. And it's quite easy to think that with Star Wars. Like, there's obviously people that don't necessarily like it or have contradictory ideas for what something should be. Like something that's quite common is like the Star Trek versus Star Wars kind of thing. I don't think that's so common now, but it was back when there was the original trilogy. You were basically either into Star Wars or a Trekkie. You was rarely in between, one or the other. You either believed in something that was more plausible as a science fiction, or you believed something that was more sort of fantasy, which I would put Star Wars into that. That is like it doesn't follow science exactly. And then the last of those seven things that Patrick put together is the idea of having a leader. And in this particular case, with Star Wars as a brand, that leader is George Lucas and always will be. Like, he is the person that created it, the origins of it. He's the mastermind um to it all. And even though he's no longer in control of it and it's now passed on to Disney, and other people are obviously taking lead of it. In terms of that leadership role from a brand point of view, it will always be George Lucas, and it will always have been his baby. And again, if you look at any successful brand, they have a leader. They have this individual person who really represents that. And to use Apple as an example, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is Apple. Any successful brand has that significant person that's connected to it.
Just a quick one to ask you for a small favour that you can do right now. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, I invite you to hit subscribe or hit follow, whatever it looks like on your podcast player. And that just means that you'll see new episodes of Branding Love Letters as they come out. If you have already subscribed to this podcast, here's what you can do right now. I invite you to leave a rating, a star rating, or leave a review, a short review. That just makes a huge difference to what I can do with this podcast, the stories that I can tell, and the insights that we can gain into emotional connections to branding. Thank you very much. Back to the interview. No, that's a fantastic framework and a really, really useful way to think about, building any brand. I mean, I think that's a framework that entrepreneurs can apply, that startups can apply.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I see it so clearly with Star Wars specifically in a way that maybe I don't see with other film franchises. Or, I feel like Star Wars. Maybe, you mentioned Marvel. I'd also put James Bond into that kind of category.
Yes.
These kind of behemoths, like these incredible films that then exist outside of the films, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that makes a lot of these things more than a film is branding. It's basically branding 101. If you look at any successful movie franchise, and you really, nailed it with those examples. Marvel, James Bond, a lot of the more substantial ones, they are more than a film. And I don't just mean books or comics or whatever. They are cemented in people's memories. And if you consider a brand uh, uh essentially people's memories in their mind, and if you have like a folder in your head and you store all of these things, with a film, it's just a story. And obviously you can obviously have an identity to a film, but it is just that you have a poster story, you watch it, done. But with things like Star Wars, Marvel, James Bond, I would say other things, even things like Barbie. There's a lot of things that can really branch out beyond just a film, and to really bottle down exactly what it is that makes them more than a film. It's branding at the end of the day. And you can see if you're able to do that, if you're able to take a film and turn it into something beyond that. We can take lessons from large franchises like Star Wars and actually think, okay, what is it that's made that successful, and can I apply that to my product? And I believe that you can, and you can. I believe that if you do all of the right things, you can make people fall in love with your product in exactly the same way as people fall in love with franchises like Star Wars.
Yeah. Has Star Wars done anything over the years that's really surprised or shocked you?
I think probably the most disappointing thing is oh, after George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, and Disney started to develop a follow-up trilogy, and it's very it's disappointing um, that they didn't write that trilogy all in one go, or didn't have the vision for that all in one go in quite the same way that George Lucas did. And also I think it's very disappointing that they didn't stay true to the leaders vision of what this should have been. And I think if Disney did stay true to that and follow that original story, then it would have been I believe it would have been substantially more successful than ending ending nine very special films with Ray Skywalker. Like it doesn't fit. It doesn't I don't feel that stays true to uh the original the six films. But it is what it is, and I think as I described in terms of a successful brand, I think it's really important that you do have that leader and you do have that single vision. And I think this is where that really failed, that it didn't stay true to that. I think also I know there's been some reaction to things like there's a TV series. I know that you will know this, but there's a Boba Fett series, and Boba Fett was a character that was very briefly in the original trilogy. He had, very short line within there, and he had a big fan base. A lot of people loved or continue to love Boba Fett, but they created a series on this, and I remember part in it which people didn't like, and I think where it went wrong, basically, it's the scene where you have these like basically teenagers that go on these motorbikes, um, and the aesthetic of those motorbikes do not fall in with the semiotics of what we believe in Star Wars to be. So, when I was talking about the sort of the visual identity of what fans associate with Star Wars, it's usually the sort of sort of um, beaten up sort of looking spaceships. So in this scene, when all these sort of teenagers jump on these bikes, they're all like very slick, colorful bikes, and it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the semiotics of what we believe Star Wars to be. Yes, I believe that they were built on a planet. I think they were built on Coruscant, so they do fit within that. But um it just didn't fit, and it didn't feel appropriate to Star Wars. And I remember a lot of people complaining. When I see it again, it just looks ridiculous. And I think if they was to stick to the sort of aesthetic that we're more familiar with within that world, I don't believe that there would have been the complaint that was there. Um,
Really, really interesting, because it's interesting that you look at that, and because you have this kind of brand built within yourself almost of like what Star Wars should be,
exactly,
that doesn't fit it.
exactly.
Yeah, really, really, really fascinating. Tell me more about you and where people can connect in with what you're doing, and especially your book that's come out recently.
Sure. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a graphic designer. My specialism is logo design now. I own a brand called Logo Geek. It's something that started as a hobby, while on the side of a full-time job, and over the years, it's developed into a real passion, and now it's my full-time thing. I don't just design logos. I also have a community around this as well. So there is a Facebook group. I have a podcast as well, which is focused on logo design. And as you mentioned, I released a book within the last year called Make a Living Designing Logos. And that's one of my real ongoing goals really is to help um, anyone that has passion around logo design to turn that into a living and to be able to make money doing what you love. So that's what my book's about. I wanted to write something that would help this, but I'm also slightly against the idea of how-to books because when it comes down to building a business, there isn't an A to Z step-by-step way of how you do it. Things are changing, the world changes a lot. Like how I built mine isn't going to be the same as how you build your business today. But so what I've tried to do is rather than, sort of going, this is how you build a business, instead I've shared what's worked for me, but also what hasn't worked for me. And also like if I was to do things and start again, what would I do? And really share, the journey that I went through over a 10-year period from going from this point of having like this idea of designing logos for a living, and how that hobby turned into something that allows me to generate a full-time income.
Yeah,
um
so
I think a
good.
lot of people have this dream and this goal, so that's what the book's about. So it's called Make a Living Designer Logos, and it's available through Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you, Ian. So finally, I would love to hear your love letter to Star Wars.
Dear Star Wars, I have been a fan of this franchise film brand for the bulk of my life. It's been something that's very special to me. It's not just a film. As I mentioned throughout this, there's so much more to it. It really is a brand. It's allowed me to make friends, to find a community that I belong to, and to continue to be something that I can get excited about. I have always got incredibly excited about every film that's ever came out more than anything. I've always gone to those films the day they come out, so that I don't miss anything, and have continued to follow it. I know that Star Wars will be something that will remain a thing for the remainder of my life and probably for all of eternity. So thank you, Star Wars. You really mean the world to me.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for letting us hear your branding love letter.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Branding Love Letters with me, Sam Thorogood. I'm a brand designer for startups, creators, charities, eco projects, and church plants. I'm on a mission. Equip these pioneering brands to bring others onto their journeys. If you're interested, you can discover more at www.pilgrimage.design. Oh, and big thank you to Thomas Thorogood for the music. Take it away, Tommy Boy.